Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our April 18th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today's episode will hit home for those of you who have been following and participating in Iowa's conservation efforts for years. While many of us are thinking about environmental protection right now, with the arrival of spring and Earth Day just a few short days away, we know that farmers keep conservation and water quality top of mind all year long, and it's been that way for decades. That's not just something we say. As one expert will tell us, farmers' long-term efforts are etched into Iowa's landscape, and they're producing results for our soil and water right now. For more, we turn to Shawn Richmond, a 25-year water quality veteran with previous stops at Iowa State University, the Iowa Department of Agriculture, and the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council. Recently, Shawn joined us here at the Iowa Farm Bureau as our new Conservation and Natural Resources Policy Advisor. Farm Bureau's Zach Bader has more with Shawn Richmond.
I'm joined by Shawn Richmond, who's Iowa Farm Bureau's new Conservation and Natural Resources Policy Advisor. Shawn, you've got really extensive background in conservation and water quality work. How about you tell us a little bit about how that started and the experience that you've gained and how that all led you here to Farm Bureau?
Yeah, so for starters, I'm a lifelong Iowan, born and raised, and I've always been passionate about conservation, water quality, and agriculture, and how those really work hand in hand. Over my 25-year career to date, I've really been blessed to have the opportunity to contribute to efforts that help maintain and increase ag productivity while simultaneously working to address the environmental concerns. Going back to my start of my professional career, I was at Iowa State University, worked there as an environmental scientist, got an opportunity there to work on the research behind developing new practices to help farmers meet our goals of reducing nutrient losses. Most of my work there was focused on wetlands as a new practice, and then following up on that, I moved to the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, where I was able to then work on implementing programs and working with farmers and stakeholders and partners across the state to help scale up efforts, help build on programs, help bring those opportunities to farmers across the state. Also worked there, on public policy efforts such as the Hypoxia Task Force, federal state agency collaborations across the U.S. focused on Mississippi River issues, as well as working on developing the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. Moving on from there, my most recent experience was at the Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council. A lot of my work there focused on measuring, documenting, and quantifying the progress that has been made by Iowa farmers across the state and over the past several decades to really better get at some quantifiable measures to show the progress being made, certainly to provide that accountability and credit for the work that's happened by Iowa farmers across the state. Also worked there to help facilitate development of new technologies, help to validate the water quality impacts of new and existing products and practices, again, focused on making sure that Iowa farmers have the best tools available to them as far as science-verified practices that let us know that we can for sure count on the reductions that we see from those. And just overall, my career has really given me a lot of great opportunities. It's spanned academia, government, private sector. That's given me a really large breadth and depth of experience in conservation, water quality, and agriculture. When the opportunity at Farm Bureau came open, I really looked at that as a place, knowing Farm Bureau and the large footprint we have across the state of Iowa, I knew immediately that coming to work for Farm Bureau was the absolute best place that I could put my experience to use and have the greatest impact.
So we know that conservation and water quality have definitely received more press coverage in recent years, but as you alluded to, with a 25-year history working in this field, we know that farmers have been working to protect soil and water quality for decades. And so as you looking back years and looking back decades, What would you say is some of the most impressive evidence that you see that farmers have been prioritizing conservation and water quality for decades?
Yeah, I mean, overall, just looking back at the scale and impact of what's been achieved to date over the past several decades because of farmer efforts across the state, it's very obvious when you drive across these landscapes and see all of the various practices that have put in place to help reduce and control erosion. Flying over, you see all the waterways, the terraces, and these signatures on the landscape of all these practices that have been put in place. It makes it very evident that there's been a large amount of work for a large amount of time to work to address where the focus has really been in the past on helping to reduce soil erosion and the associated phosphorus that goes along with that. Just some recent evidence we have because of quantification efforts in the state show that we have over 500,000 terraces in the state that span over 90,000 miles, which is longer than the length of all of the streams in Iowa combined. We have over 300,000 acres of grassed waterways, over 100,000 ponds, and nearly 250,000 water and sediment control basins. Those are structural practices that don't happen overnight. They're very targeted. They take time to develop, both from the technical resource planning and construction. But overall, that scale that we've achieved across all of those is really a testament to the commitment of Iowa farmers to implement conservation. Along with some of those structural practices, Iowa also leads the nation in the amount of farmland using conservation tillage, which has had a large impact in reducing erosion and phosphorus losses. Getting to the quantification side of that in terms of looking at our goals under the nutrient reduction strategy, Iowa's goal for agriculture under that nutrient reduction strategy is to achieve a 29% reduction in our phosphorus losses to Iowa waters. The practices that I listed out and several others, quantifying those shows that, according to INREC, Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council data, that we've achieved a 27% reduction in our phosphorus losses since the 80s. So seeing how close we are to the goal, the trajectory that we've been on for the past several decades, shows that really towards that goal we're nearly there, and really it's within reach.
So we've alluded already a couple of times to Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy, which of course was first funded by the Iowa legislature in 2013, and how that has really coordinated and accelerated Iowa's conservation work over the past decade, placing an emphasis on collaboration and using proven research-based practices to reduce both phosphorus and nitrates. So again, we've kind of looked back over the course of a couple of decades and the result that that's had. From your perspective, as we look at since the nutrient reduction strategy was passed about 10 years ago, from your perspective, what are some of the most impressive signs of progress that we are seeing more recently?
Certainly one that jumps to the top of the list overall is the increased and ongoing amount of collaboration and partnerships across the state. I could try listing out all of the different groups and efforts and organizations that have different focuses, but all working towards a common goal at helping us achieve our conservation and water quality goals across the state. Really, back at the time when the nutrient strategy was first released, a lot of efforts were really starting to form up, and really just kind of, relatively speaking, we had a handful of demonstration type projects around the state to help demonstrate the best technologies available, the best available science, use those as hubs of information to get the word out, to share information with farmers. Now those projects have really dramatically multiplied across the state and have moved on from more of demonstration projects into scaling up to full-scale implementation of these practices and technologies, working towards achieving the goals of the nutrient strategy. Nowadays you can't throw a rock without hitting a conservation project or watershed project or some type of partnership. Really, they're everywhere across the state in everyone's backyard. Another thing that I've seen as a great sign of continued progress, since the strategy's come out, is that thanks to the nutrient strategy, it has helped us increase the focus on nitrogen and nitrate, given that those are the goals included in that. We've seen farmers really be quick to adopt many of those practices. Some evidence of that is the dramatic increase we've seen across the state in the use of cover crops. In the 2020 crop year, INREC survey data showed that we had over 3 million acres of cover crops planted across the state. Comparing that to a decade ago when we probably had less than 10,000 acres shows the dramatic scale up and adoption that happens from field to field, county to county. Nutrient management practices have also been ones that have come a long ways to help minimize nitrogen losses in our fields. Technologies like nitrification inhibitors. Some of these were virtually non-existent in the 70s and 80s, and now today are the common practice with over 80% of fall anhydrous applications using nitrification inhibitors to help stabilize that nitrogen, prevent loss, and make sure it's available for the crop and not getting into our streams. We've also seen some shifts recently in timing of application. The norm isn't necessarily to go out just one time in the fall or spring and put out that nitrogen application. We're seeing increases in split applications across fall, spring, and in-season. So really some positive things we're seeing both on the in-field practices and nutrient management side. Into the edge of field practices, the development of those has been an important avenue of progress for us as well across the state. We've seen great development of those and scale-up projects, the Blitz projects we've heard about recently in the state to really enhance the pace and scale of putting out wetlands and bioreactors and saturated buffers. Some of these are really relatively new practices. CREP wetlands and bioreactors hadn't been around really all that long before the science assessment for the nutrient strategy was put in place. Even since the strategy was originally put out, new science has been added for saturated buffers, multi-purpose oxbow wetlands, and really this shows that we're not just being status quo happy with the practices we had available to us at the time of the strategy. We're continuing to look at new tools and develop those and work to implement those across the state. That speaks a lot to me to the continued innovation and really pivoting our focus to where it's needed now to address the priorities of the nutrient strategy, while also giving farmers the best technologies to meet those needs.
So it's pretty clear just in the progress that you listed there that there's a lot of progress that's being made. Unfortunately, that's not going to stop some people from being skeptical or questioning whether or not Iowa is on the right track, especially long term. So let's close with this. What's the best evidence that you're seeing right now, Shawn, that Iowa has the direction, the momentum, and the commitment that it needs to continue progressing and even accelerate the progress that we've established so far moving forward?
Yeah, so I'd be remiss if I didn't first start out with the strong foundation that we've laid with our past efforts and commitments by farmers across the state, which has already been demonstrated very well, with very focused efforts to help focus on reducing soil erosion and phosphorus losses that go along with that. Looking back, we see that those approaches may have taken time, but they were successful, and they have provided us a model, I believe, that we can replicate going forward as we turn and pivot and focus our efforts more to nitrogen while still maintaining some focus on phosphorus and soil erosion. But we have seen that those past efforts have borne fruit and they have been successful. So as far as looking forward, that gives me a lot of optimism that those types of practices and approaches will continue to work to the extent that we continue to support them. Certainly the collaborations and the partnerships I mentioned earlier, those are only going to continue to grow, get larger, get stronger, get more efficient. They're very powerful. Those types of working arrangements that the nutrient strategy has laid the framework for to help farmers and cities and industry work together towards these common goals under the nutrient strategy are critically important. It's really helped to get us past some of the finger pointing that there was in the past, and looking forward to say, we have some common goals here. Let's not worry so much about saying who's responsible for what and just work together towards these common goals and find ways that we can do that together. I'm also really encouraged by seeing the continued dedication that we have through our land-grant universities to continue the research and innovation efforts that they're so important for providing and being able to help us out with, identifying new technologies, validating existing products and practices that can show us what are the best places that we can achieve, reducing our nitrogen and phosphorus losses, how can we best economically do that, and how can we make that work along agriculture so that we maintain and increase that productivity alongside that. Also looking at, ways that we can, build capacity, scaling up, building efficiencies. The private sector partnerships, public-private partnerships have been critically important in that, between government and the private sector, finding ways to add capacity and efficiency and enable us to really move forward more quickly towards achieving the goals we have with several of the practices across the state.
And of course, now we've got the funding, the long-term sustainable funding to support those efforts as well, and that commitment.
Yeah, we've really seen new and unprecedented levels of dedicated long-term sustainable funding in Iowa focused on conservation and water quality. It's been very welcoming to see those types of efforts come about. The commitment from the legislature and the state and federal agencies to make sure that Iowa farmers have what they need to carry out the practices and the programs that are going to enable us as a state to achieve the goals of our nutrient strategy. Certainly, as we look at farmer efforts going forward, the past has shown us that we've made great progress where those efforts and funding and resources have been focused. I believe the future is going to be the same, and especially with the new levels of funding and conservation work that we have going on today, we have seen results. We've got good data now that has really helped us to quantify the impacts that those past efforts have. They will continue to help us quantify the impacts we have going forward, help us to certainly do some adaptive management along the way and make sure that we're always focusing where we can see that we're having the most impacts. But bottom line is what I see is that we have had results over the past. I expect that we're going to continue to see those similar results because of the situation we're in today with the support we have, and that we're definitely on the path to producing more positive results going forward.
We talk a lot about how we haven't reached the finish line when it comes to water quality. And while that's definitely true, I think it's also important to reflect on all of the ground we have covered so far, the things we have achieved, and the evidence that points to a very promising future. It's not just proof for the naysayers, it's validation and fuel that should energize each of you who spend your days protecting our natural resources and striving to leave something even better for the next generation. If that's something you'd like to hear even more about, we'd encourage you to check out conservationcountsiowa.com. Next up, let's bring on a guest who's going to talk a bit about setting effective goals. You just heard Shawn Richmond say that 90,000 miles of terraces and 3 million acres of cover crops didn't happen overnight. They also didn't happen without planning or goals. So let's bring on Matt Booth, who delivered the opening keynote address at Iowa Farm Bureau's Acres of Opportunity Conference in Cedar Rapids, held earlier this spring. Acres of Opportunity brought together farmers to talk about a variety of niche crop and livestock opportunities, but Matt's advice on goal setting is really something that can be applied to any farming operation. Spokesman editor Tom Block caught up with Matt after his keynote address. Let's listen in.
Matt, thanks for joining us. We were here at the Acres of Opportunity Conference, and you talked about chasing your dreams and people who are starting a new business to diversify their farms. What are the first steps for people to take to achieve their goals?
Yeah, one of the first things, of course, most people have dreams. They have something in their head that they're chasing, that they want to accomplish somehow, some way. But I've really broken it down to 3 simple steps, and it's not anything new under the sun, right? The first step is you got to write them down. And I'm not going to go into all the statistics of why. I think most people know that if you write something down and you go after it, you're more likely to achieve it. The second step is to review your goals monthly, once a month. And I'm not talking like hours. You don't have to get out a big book and charts and everything and graphs and do videos. You just have to review them for like 10 minutes once a month. And then the third thing, which most people don't do, which we should do, is carry them with you. And it's easier than ever to carry goals with you because everybody has a cell phone. So if you got a cell phone, there's no reason you can't download an app or work on a Word doc that has your goals on it.
So you really eliminated lots of the hurdles or obstacles people would say that they can't do this or don't want to do this. It's easy to do.
Yeah, one of the big reasons people don't do goal setting is because they don't know how. That's a big reason, and I've made it real simple. Write them, review them, carry them. Another reason is people are overwhelmed. There's too many steps, and you can dive into it as deep as you want. You can make SMART goals, specific, measurable, all time tested, everything, and you can dive into that. But some people are just so overwhelmed by that. You can have books and CD-ROMs and apps and classes, but don't get overwhelmed. So people don't know how they get overwhelmed. These are reasons that they don't do it. And another reason is fear of failure is a big reason, because if I say, hey, I'm going to lose 10 pounds, and I write it down and I tell everyone and show everyone, and I only lose 5 pounds, it could be considered a failure. But failing is okay. It's part of life. It's just, hey, I lost 5 pounds. Isn't that good?
And sharing them with other people is a part of making them accountable. You find that in weight loss groups. It's one thing to have the goals internalized, but once you work up the courage or whatever it takes to share them with someone else, how does that help?
Yeah, sure. So saying it out loud, and I even talked about this, Bartimaeus, if we remember the blind man in Jerusalem on the road that Jesus came across, and he knew what he wanted. And Jesus would often say, hey, what do you want? To people. And he said, I want to see. There's something magical about knowing what you want, saying it out loud. Now, I'm a pretty confident person, and when I have a goal, I'll share them with anyone. I'll tell anyone. I'm not afraid of that. Now, not everyone's built like that, because sometimes if you say, hey, I'm going to quit smoking, and you tell that to all your friends, well, lots of times if you're a smoker, your friends are also smokers. So then your friends say, well, you'll never quit smoking. It's too hard. Maybe next year you should quit. So sometimes out of spite, people will be motivated by that. And if you say I can't do something, that'll make me want to do it more. But you have to be cautious. And when you say them out loud, you want to say them around people who are like-minded. And this is why if you have a weight loss thing, why you're getting a room with a bunch of people who are trying to lose weight as well. And you're all encouraging and helping each other. But not everybody responds well to negative feedback. So that's something that you have to know your own personality when you're chasing your dreams.
That also melds into another one of your points, was the power of attitude, and a positive attitude most of the time. Talk about that.
Yeah. We live in a crazy world right now, more so than you and I have ever lived. And it's negative, negative, negative everywhere. Negative is easier. It's tougher to be positive. No one can be positive 100% of the time. Just get that out of your mind. It's okay to have a crappy day, or a bad day, or one of those days. But if you're not careful and you don't think about it on a regular basis, one of those days turns into 2 of those days. And then 2 become 3, and pretty soon you have like 5 years in a row worth of one of those days where you come home and your little dog runs up to you and it's a kick the dog kind of day. And we don't want to do that. So just so you know, no dogs have been hurt in the making of this podcast, okay? Sure. No one kicks dogs, really. It's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor. But it is important. Everyone has their circle, but maybe to get outside your circle, different ideas and different influences.
Yeah, sure. Anytime. And that's what really the Acres of Opportunity Conference is about in Farm Bureau. I mean, it's getting more information, maybe getting out of that comfort zone. When you get stuck in a rut, a rut is just like a grave with no ends, And so it's important to get new information and new knowledge and different perspectives from conferences like this and networking, and from Farm Bureau, of course.
Now, what happens when you've written these goals down, you've started down the path, but your goals change, or you find out maybe it's not achievable or it's not the direction you want to go anymore?
Yeah, it's okay to fail at a goal, and that's all part of it, and it will change you into a different direction. There's nothing wrong with any of that. If I wanted to be an NBA basketball player, I'm only 5'9". It's probably not going to happen. But there's lots of things in basketball that I could do at 5'9". I could be a trainer. I could be a coach. I could own a basketball team. Couldn't I? I could be the marketing or business director for a basketball team. So it really helps you take that dream and shape it and go after it and include all that passion. It gives you direction.
Is there an ideal number of goals, size of a list? People may struggle. Big goals, small goals. Is this really worth putting down on paper?
Yeah, it's different for everyone. And I would say just get started. Just grab a piece of paper and write down 10 goals. If you're a visual person, over time that may turn into a dream board where they're all pictures. Sometimes people say if you have more than one goal, you have too many. I've gone from 3 goals on my list to 300. So it's really, you'll find what works and what's comfortable for you. But the key is to take action, to just sit down and write down your goals, share them with your spouse or your partner. Because here's what happens. If you both have a dream of saving money, it's good to have that dream. But then let's say you save $20,000. The husband says, perfect, I've always wanted a bass boat. And the wife says, perfect, we got 20 grand that we're going to remodel the kitchen. Do you see how it's important to have goals, to be able to say them out loud, show people, write them down, email them? You can almost smell them. There's magic in, as much maybe as that seems mundane or basic, but the magic is in the mundane.
Yeah, and when you achieve that goal, maybe being able to cross it off, which is satisfying, but then to set a higher goal or set a new goal, what you want to do with that $20,000.
Sure, and it's your list. Maybe, if you save $20,000, maybe you save another $20,000 and you get the bass boat and the remodeled kitchen. It's really unlimited to what you want to work for, and it gives you that structure that helps you achieve your goals.
Perfect, Matt. Anything else, parting words you'd have for farmers looking to start a new business?
Yeah, connect with the Farm Bureau. Farming is a crazy industry, and, I grew up on a farm, and farming is tough. But don't just say you're a farmer. Be proud that you're a farmer. And if you're a farmer, do it right. Get a plan, set some goals, and do it right, because we are what feeds not only our country, our world.
Write your goals, review them monthly, and carry them with you. You heard Matt say that the steps he's proposing aren't anything radical, but you also heard him say that the magic is in the mundane. Think about that. The path to your dreams starts with a simple list of goals. Just like the path to water quality progress can start with something small, like one more terrace, another acre of cover crops, or one new conservation practice on your farm. The steps that seem small, or even insignificant to you, can grow into big things for agriculture and our entire state. That's all for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us for our next one on May 2nd. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.